Right, we're underway. So welcome everyone today to the latest Charter Path, Chart Your Path webinar series. Today we're focused on how to volunteer your financial skills overseas, and really pleased to say that we're joined today by a representative from AfID, Accounting for International Development, who are the absolute experts in volunteering financial skills overseas. So should be a really informative session, a chance to learn a lot about how you can volunteer your skills abroad. Just quickly to provide context on speakers today, you have myself, so I'm Alex Marsh. I'm one of the co-founders of Charter Path. I'll talk a bit more about Charter Path in a moment. I originally trained as a chartered accountant, and alongside my professional career, very keen volunteer. So currently now a charity trustee, so for a couple of charities, and also a school governor. And then our other speaker today from AfID is David Busby. I'll just hand over to David just to say a few words and introduce himself.
Thanks, Alex. Evening, everybody. Thank you very much for coming along. Thank you to CharterPath for arranging tonight's session. I think we've only got 45 minutes to an hour maybe, so it'll probably be quite a brief overview of what's quite a big topic, but hopefully it gives you a good insight. But yes, I'm the Volunteer Services Manager at AfID. Been with AfID for 7 or 8 years. And obviously, a lot of what I'll talk about this evening will be through the lens of having arranged assignments through AfID over those 7 or 8 years. But hopefully, a lot of what's covered will apply to volunteering overseas and remotely more generally as well.
Brilliant. Thanks, David. I'll just click on in terms of what we'll be covering then over the next 45 minutes or so. So just quick introductions to Charter Path, and I'll correct myself now, AfID, David.
Or AfID, doesn't matter. We're not fussy.
Yeah. We'll also talk about then the roles that volunteers with financial skills can play, and that's a real focus. We're really focusing on how to bring financial skills to the non-profit sector. David's going to cover some of the pros and cons of volunteering at home or overseas. And how, if you are volunteering overseas, the opportunity to experience a new culture. Then really pleased to say that we're joined by a guest, actually almost, well, straight back from volunteering over in Tanzania, Lise. So we'll have some first-hand experiences from an AfID volunteer based on their experiences volunteering abroad. We'll give a bit more detail in terms of how you can start your volunteering journey with AfID. And then plenty of time for Q&A. So please do, as we're going, put any questions you might have in the chat. I'll be monitoring the chat as we run through, but also there'll be opportunity at the end to ask any questions you might have of myself, David, or Lise. So let's just quickly go on then to just quick introductions to Charter Path and Accounting for International Development. So I'll just provide a quick intro to Charter Path for those who don't know us. For Charter Path, our mission is to significantly increase the proportion of finance professionals who are volunteering in the UK. At the moment, it's estimated around 10% of finance professionals volunteer their time and skills to non-profits each year, and our ambition is to increase that to 50%. Similar to what you see in the legal sector, where volunteering really is part of your career. Particularly important that we push to encourage more people to volunteer, given the really difficult challenges facing the non-profit sector right now. And if you look at, off the back of both the pandemic, but also the cost of living crisis, the financial pressures on the non-profit sector are significant. And that's where financial skills can help them to improve the financial resilience and sustainability of their non-profit. When we look at some of the reasons why people currently don't volunteer, unsurprisingly, many is finding the time. But actually, interestingly, 3 in 10, it's not even occurred to them. And that's what sessions like tonight are about, is to hopefully inspire you to think about what you could do in terms of volunteering your time and skills to the non-profit sector. 3 ways that we do, we look to try and help chart a path between non-profits and financial skills. First off is the inspiration side, so really targeted towards finance professionals and inspiring them to volunteer their skills. But also helping to connect people, non-profits with that community. And it's some of the great work that we'll hear more from David in a moment in terms of AfID is really helping to make that connection between non-profits overseas with volunteers here with the right skills. And then the last piece is engaging. How can we engage the wider sector to help remove some of those barriers? So that part about people having the available time, how can we help address some of those barriers? And particularly that could be things like working with employers, for example, to encourage them to support skill-based volunteering as part of almost like their benefit offering to their employees. So yeah, hopefully that gives you a taste of some of the activities that we do at CharterPath. But tonight is really focused on that inspire piece and how we can inspire more finance professionals to volunteer their skills overseas. I'll now just hand over to David, who can give us an introduction into accounting for international development.
Thanks, Alex. Yes, so accounting for international development, or AfID or AfID, either or is fine. This first slide just shows some of our wonderful past overseas volunteers, clearly hard at work in all of these photographs. I guess this is just to show that when volunteering overseas, there's lots of very important, impactful work to be done, but it's meant to be an enjoyable experience as well, and make good friends with your colleagues and others as well. So just a flavour of what's involved. But yeah, accounting for international development. So we're a UK-based social enterprise, and the core of what we do, the core of what we've always done, is arranging overseas volunteer placements for specifically accountants and auditors and other finance professionals. And it gives them the opportunity to volunteer and give back and use their professional skills to provide pro bono support to a really broad range of non-profits globally. Overseas assignments that we arrange, they can be from as short as 2 weeks. So a lot of our volunteers just do it as part of their annual leave, or they can go up to sort of 6 to 8 weeks, or 2-3 months, occasionally 6 months, depending on what the need is. So accountants could be budgeting with a street child centre in Kampala. You could be coaching a hospital bookkeeper in Kigali, or helping with financial reporting for a school in Kathmandu, and 101 other scenarios as well. Our partners, really broad range of organisations, so NGOs, charities, but also social enterprises, hospitals, microfinance organisations, agricultural projects, schools, some very small, some much larger. And I guess the common theme with all of them is that they're all doing really amazing work to, as it says here, tackle poverty and inequality in their communities, but often simply unable to access professional services or professional support in the area of financial management and their accounting and finance, which is where we come in, or our volunteers come in, I should say. Yes, so this slide just gives a bit of context to what we've been up to over the years. So started in 2009, and those early years we did a handful of placements, and grown year on year since then. So to date, we've arranged just over 1,500 overseas volunteer assignments. And those volunteers have supported over 500 different non-profit organisations in 60 different countries. We estimate that's some go for 2 weeks, some go for 2 months, some go for 6 months, but maybe 380,000 hours of pro bono support provided in total over those years, which we think probably equates to around £20 million of professional services. Obviously, things changed a little bit for us in early 2020, as it did for everyone. So we actually went just over 2 years in the end of not being able to send any volunteers anywhere, which was difficult, but we managed to sort of refocus our efforts to providing remote volunteer support instead. And those first remote assignments were actually with partners of ours that were due to receive a volunteer in person, but we switched it around and sort of worked out what could be done remotely instead. and we've done over 50 of those placements to date, which have been really successful and actually probably more successful than we initially thought they might be. So going forward, the overseas volunteer program's back up and running, sending volunteers all over the place again. But alongside that, we are continuing with the remote volunteer support, just dependent on what model suits each organisation best. So this is just a sort of summary of the 3 things we do. So there's overseas volunteer support, and that can fall into broadly 2 categories. So on the whole, we support our partners on an ongoing basis. So they would receive maybe 2, 3, 4, 5 volunteers from us over the course of several years. So it's a gradual process of capacity building where one volunteer hands on to the next. Not directly, usually there's probably 6 months, maybe a year between those assignments. But essentially trying to get them to a point whereby they don't need that outside support anymore, because the local staff have had the training and have been given the confidence they need to take things forward themselves. Occasionally we have an assignment that's more of a specific one-off intervention to address a particular issue. We send a volunteer, they do what they need to do, and then we wouldn't expect to need to send any further volunteers. And then alongside that, remote volunteer support. So this has been particularly effective for those charities that have very limited resources, very limited staff availability, actually, or infrastructure to host a volunteer in person. So it might be that they don't actually have an office. The person doing the financial management is the founder of the organisation, and they're doing 1,000,001 other things. So actually having somebody that they can call on a more part-time basis remotely, rather than a very intensive in-person placement, works well. And of course, excellent way for accountants that aren't able to travel or don't want to travel to assist as well. And then the final thing just to touch on is charity recruitment services. So we do support a lot of primarily UK-based organisations, but some overseas as well, with their recruitment needs, and often we fill those roles with past overseas volunteers of ours. So it's quite a common path that somebody will volunteer with us. They'll get the bug for international development or working in the non-profit sector, and then go on to a career in the sector. And we're very happy to help people with that where we can.
Brilliant. Thank you, David. That's very comprehensive. Thank you for providing that context. We're now just giving a bit more background on CharterPath and AfID. Just going to talk through quickly the role that volunteers with financial skills can play in the voluntary sector. One part I just wanted to share up front here is that there are a number of different types of volunteer roles, and often just purely the language can confuse people, and it can be a barrier. So I just wanted to quickly talk through the different types of roles that you can undertake, but then tonight's focus is particularly on the financial volunteer aspect of these different roles. So what are the different options out there? So often you'll hear about becoming, say, a trustee of a charity, and that's a bit like sitting on the board of a business, but sitting on the board of a charity. And you ultimately, as a trustee, you're responsible for governing that charity and directing how it's run. And that's looking at things like, is that charity delivering its charitable benefit? Is it meeting all its legal and kind of regulatory compliance requirements? And importantly, that the finances are managed appropriately. So, very appropriate in terms of for people with financial skills. Within that, in terms of a specific type of trustee, or not always a trustee, but specific role within a charity can be also to be recognised as being the treasurer of a charity. And the role of the treasurer is to particularly help the trustees to fulfil their obligations to provide that financial oversight. So again, leans heavily on the skills that finance professionals will have. Responsibilities include things like the financial management of the charity, but also financial reporting, for example. So it could be the preparation and sign off of the accounts for the charity. Separate to sort of the charity side, you can have school governor roles. So they're often looking at people with actually the most in-demand skill set amongst school governors, and school governing bodies is actually individuals with financial skills right now, just given the financial pressures that schools are facing. And every school in the UK will have a board of governors who are responsible for overseeing the management of the school. So it's essentially the strategic direction of the school, making sure they hold that head teacher to account, but also looking again at the financial outcomes of the school. And it's a really good entry point for people looking for a recurring volunteering role, is to become a school governor. Now, those three roles are all typically recurring roles. So you might be attending a meeting, once a term or once a quarter, sitting on a committees, for example. But increasingly, what we've heard from people, from finance professionals that we work with, is that they're looking for, not always for that sort of regular commitment. It could be that they want support on more of a project basis for a specific task or opportunity that the charity is trying to progress. And that's what we call financial volunteers. And that can be more of an ad hoc basis. It could be helping a charity to put in place a new system. It could be helping them with a specific fundraising opportunity or bid or a grant they're applying for. You could be mentoring someone, so you could be mentoring the sort of finance lead within a charity. But really importantly, it could be both in the UK or overseas. And that links so nicely with what we're talking about tonight in terms of a lot of the roles that AfID are supporting on could be in this sort of project base where there's a specific opportunity to go and help a non-profit. So that's particularly the focus for today's session, is around more the financial volunteer types of roles and looking at those in terms of overseas opportunities. So I'm now going to hand back to David. He's going to talk about, really importantly, why are volunteers with financial skills needed?
And they are very much needed. Absolutely. Just to mention, you're right. This is focused on volunteering, sort of more on a project basis. But we do ourselves help a number of UK-based charities with board appointments. So I think last year we maybe helped 27, 28 different organisations in the UK with primarily appointing a treasurer, or sometimes they just need another trustee on the board with finance skills. So we always have a pool of those opportunities available. So it's well worth having a look on the website and so on. But why are volunteers with financial skills needed specifically with our partners overseas, or our overseas-based partners? So our volunteer accountants, I've got here pro bono consultants, because that sometimes is a better way of phrasing it, because these volunteers are highly skilled professionals, and sometimes volunteering sounds I don't know. There's lots of types of volunteering, some very much skills based, and other volunteer roles not so much. So that's why it's great. What Charter Path are doing is trying to get people to utilise their professional backgrounds as the best way of making an impact in the sector. But our partners come to us for various reasons, but I guess the main one is that it gives them access to skills and experience that are otherwise inaccessible or unavailable to them. So they might be working in a very small community, and there simply aren't qualified accountants or finance professionals in that community that they can draw upon, or if there are, they're not able to afford them. So that comes to the second point, that it's a cost-effective option for limited budgets compared to the use of paid consultants. I have to say, when we onboard new partners, that's one of the first questions we often ask is, why are you not paying somebody to come out and do this? And often there's a very simple answer, that there just simply isn't the funds to be able to do that. That we need to make sure that not requesting pro bono support because it's free and why not, but that there's a genuine reason why they need the support on that basis. And that links to the third point, which is that hiring and training new staff is more expensive than investing in strengthening the capabilities of existing staff. So a key part of any AfID assignment is to work with the local finance team and upskill them, give them the tools they need and the confidence they need to grow and develop into their role. So could be working with a finance manager that has maybe an accountancy degree, but they might be handling some quite large funds from donors, and it's helping them make that step up through mentoring and coaching. The fourth point, high staff satisfaction from specialist mentoring. So we found this more and more over the years. It's become clear that actually a big impact of having an AfID volunteer is just increasing the morale of the local finance team, who often haven't had much attention, and perhaps the program side of the organisation is gets more training and yeah, more attention. So having a highly qualified finance professional traveling from the other side of the world to sit next to you for 3, 4, 5, 6 weeks and give you that one-to-one coaching really empowers them and makes them feel very much valued by the organisation, and that they're being invested in. And then the final point, improve transparency and accountability to attract future funding. So it looks very good for these organisations when they approach new donors or existing donors to ask for more funding, if they can show that a chartered accountant has spent 2 months with them looking through their books and making recommendations, improving their internal controls, looking at how they're reporting back to that donor and improving that, and just demonstrates to those donors that the organisation takes their financial management seriously and is looking to be sort of as close to best practice on that side of things as they possibly can. Yes, so this slide is sort of more into the detail of what specific tasks finance volunteers can help with, because often I speak to potential volunteers and they get the concept and they think it's really good, but then the question comes of what will I actually be asked to help with, and am I going to be able to do that? And that comes from volunteers at all stages of their career, all different levels of experience. But I won't run through this whole list, and it's not an exhaustive list at all. It's just some examples of the sorts of things that our volunteers get involved with, and it's based on the current circumstances of the organisation and where they find themselves, the resources they have available in terms of financial resources, but also staff, human resources, and the capabilities of the local staff. And also the local context that they operate within. So just to mention a couple, the first one, conducting a financial health check, identifying gaps and making recommendations. So that, if you had to sort of describe a typical AfID assignment in one sentence, that would be it really. And the first assignment with a new partner, that really is sort of the core focus. So it's basically looking at what they're doing currently, identifying any issues and starting to make some recommendations as to how things can be strengthened and perhaps streamlined, and starting to put a plan together as to how to manage that. Developing and strengthening internal controls, again, that's a big one, and to be honest, any AfID assignment, there's an element of that to it. It could be the sole focus or one of the main focuses, or it could be less of an issue, but we'd also always want our volunteers to take a look at their controls and see what can be strengthened. Further down, training finance staff, I think, fall from the bottom. So again, that is a key element to any assignment. So whether you're helping them with their budgeting or their reporting or their controls, or various other things, the volunteer is not there to do their budget, it's to help the local finance manager to do their budget, so that when the volunteer goes away next year, they'll be able to do it on their own. So yeah, that's a flavour of the different tasks, and each assignment is obviously different, and they do vary from assignments that are very much focused on the day-to-day and practical improvements to their bookkeeping or their accounting, but then the other end of the spectrum, we have other assignments that are slightly more strategic in their nature. So you might be looking at the long-term sustainability of the organisation and their different income streams, and looking at their business plan maybe, or helping them to develop one. And we're lucky, fortunate that we have lots of different volunteers with different skill sets, and our role really is to make sure we're sending the right people to the right places where their particular background is going to be of most use.
I was going to ask you, David, about that just briefly, because we had a question emailed in from someone who wasn't able to join, but they were keen for me to ask as part of the session, was exactly around that, in terms of, say you looked at this list and you're like, oh yeah, I feel quite confident with that, but depending on maybe where your career's gone, maybe you haven't been involved in an audit for, in my case, I started my career auditing, but haven't been involved in an audit for nearly 15 years. Maybe I'd feel, a bit nervous about, sort of trying to support an area like that. That's part of what AfID will do, is it to support on sort of that fit of your skills and experience with that potential charity.
Absolutely. We certainly do our best on that front.
Yeah.
I mean, volunteers do have to come into it with a mindset that none of them will be doing sort of exactly what they do on a day-to-day basis, just because the context is so different. And if I'm honest, because most of the partners are small community-based organisations, for any qualified accountant, they're actually, we could throw most assignments at them, and technically they're not going to be out of their depth. But if we want to make the most use of if they've only got 3 weeks and we really want to get the most out of their time and make sure they can have the biggest impact, then yes, we need to make sure that it's aligned to as closely as possible to their background. And you're right, we have some assignments where a newly qualified auditor would be brilliant for. And other assignments where, well, other volunteers that might have decades and decades of really senior level business and finance experience, and they would be excellent for a certain type of assignment. But actually, the assignment that the newly qualified auditor does, the other volunteer would be would perhaps struggle with. So, but there's something for everyone there. There really is.
That's really good to hear, and it's an interesting one, because similarly in some of the roles that we support within CharterPath, where often the finance professionals wouldn't necessarily know that you might be supporting a charity where there isn't anyone in the team who's in the charities team who has any finance background at all, and they're actually they're trying to learn themselves through resources out there, how to create a budget or how to produce a set of accounts, but coming from no finance background at all. So often actually just the skills you'd have in terms of your professional career, even if you hadn't done it recently, you could probably more easily find the resources or speak to someone in your network to be able to support on that specific task.
Exactly.
For that non-profit. All right, let me just click on, just click backwards. So just next up, David, we're going to talk through a bit around the pros and cons of volunteering at home or overseas, and given you see both sides of that spectrum in terms of the types of roles that you're supporting on, very well placed to kind of give that honest view to people potentially looking to volunteer.
Cover this relatively briefly, but yeah, it's obviously a very different experience living and working somewhere. And you get into the routine of your working week, and then you have your own weekends, and it's all in a very different environment, and you get to meet lots of different people. So that's all part of the experience of volunteering overseas, which you don't get from remote volunteering. You do get a little bit of a sort of a peek into that world, but it's obviously difficult over Zoom. You still make strong connections with the people you're working with. So this slide just runs through some of the main differences. So the scope of work could well be very similar. There's some assignments where really the local finance manager needs somebody with them to talk things through one-to-one, which to a certain extent can be replicated on Zoom, but not always. The time commitment is different for the volunteers. So to volunteer overseas, you need at least 2 or 4 weeks, and you'd be working full time in the office. We would always encourage volunteers where they can to take an extra week or two to do a bit of travelling either side of the assignment. Whereas remote volunteering, it is on a part-time basis, which works for both volunteers and also the partner organisation. So maybe 2 or 4 hours a week over a 2 or 3 month period. And most of our remote volunteers are doing it alongside their full-time job as well. So it can be flexible around that. Turnaround time. So if you want to volunteer overseas, really we need at least 2 or 3 months notice before you'd be able to start something. Whereas if you want to do some remote volunteering, in theory, we could well get you up and running with something within 2 or 3 weeks. And then there's cost implications as well. So in-person volunteering, there are costs. So your flights is something that you'd usually need to cover yourself. Some of our partners can help with some volunteer costs like accommodation, but generally it's self-funded, whereas you don't have those costs if you're volunteering remotely. So and then extending assignments. So a lot of our overseas volunteers, they do continue providing some support informally to the partner they've visited once they return home. Remote volunteering, that's also the case. So the initial commitment might be that you're providing support to this organisation for 2 or 3 months, and you get to the end of that, there's more to be done. You're still keen to be involved, then it can become more of an ongoing relationship.
Brilliant. Thanks,
but yeah, they're quite different. And I mean, if the full experience, the full AfID experience is always going to be the traveling overseas and becoming a real part of that local community as much as the work you're doing. But remote volunteering is a really good option if that's not possible. And we have plenty of past volunteers who've done an overseas assignment with us, or 2 or 3, but it's not something they're able to do each and every year. So in the interim, they take on some remote projects as well.
Brilliant. It's helpful to get that kind of context of that ability to do that, and the fact that you could do the remote volunteering, for example, around your day-to-day job as well. And that it links quite nicely actually with this one then, in terms of that distinction between those 2 options, with the next topic, which was particularly then, I suppose, that part about experiencing new culture, which you'll get sort of, I suppose, a deeper taste for with the in-person. So yeah, just hand back to you, David, in terms of, I know you bring that to life with some of the aspects of experiencing new culture here.
Yeah, absolutely, and that is right. That's the sort of key difference, I guess, or one of the key differences is that as part of the experience, you are getting this insight into a different place and a different way of working, and different people, different customs and traditions, which you obviously don't get on Zoom quite so much. And again, this is a huge topic, and can't cover it fully really tonight. But yeah, that's all part of the experience, and we do prepare our volunteers for that as much as we can. And we don't send any of our volunteers anywhere that they don't feel comfortable travelling to. Everywhere has to be safe and politically stable and all the rest of it. But there would be, for all of our volunteers, even the most well-travelled, an element of culture shock as well when you arrive. For some volunteers more than others, which again is all part of why people want to do it, because they do want to have that different experience. Lise will probably be able to give us her insight on how she's found that when we come on to that. But this slide really was just to give a quick sort of visual demonstration of experience and new culture. So on the left-hand side, we've got what the British say. In the middle, we've got what the British mean. And on the right, we've got what others understand. So
I'm now terrified, David, to say anything to you in response to anything. Like, I was reading those ones like very interesting.
Yeah. Oh, I noted that. Yeah.
And I've got a bit of like PTSD with that bottom one where it says I only have a few minor comments, and you're like, I've definitely been there through my career at various times where someone said that to me.
That's the thing. I mean, we know exactly what that means, but the finance manager at this rural children's centre in Rwanda
Yeah.
may take it literally. So
Yes.
so it's just something to be aware of, I guess. And it's just one example. I mean, language is important, but it's just behaviours and things like that. So it's not going in what our advice to volunteers, and we do provide plenty of advice on this subject, is on day one, you don't want to just rush into the office and call a meeting and start sort of laying down the law. It's much better to take 2 or 3 days to see how they operate and how they interact with each other, and sort of follow their lead.
Yeah, it's interesting, that point, because when we've talked about some of our, in other sessions about top tips for finance professionals getting just their very first volunteer role, kind of regardless of where that is, one of our tips is exactly that, which is it's having like patience, but also respect for the non-profit sector, that it will work in different ways. Often people are doing many different roles at the same time, in terms of within that non-profit, or other roles beyond just the charity as well. And actually, sometimes sort of behaviors that you might be used to in a sort of well-resourced corporate life, whether that's the sort of cultural side or behavioral side, might not be right in that sector. And I think the best way to judge that is exactly as you've said, is sort of to a certain extent observe, build the relationships, and then work towards understanding how they communicate, and
For sure,
as to how you can best support.
our volunteers do also they would have several conversations with the host partner that they're going out to support before they arrive at the office on day one. So there's and that's quite important, actually, having those, even if it's just 2 or 3 short chats before getting there, just to get a feel for some of the differences.
Yeah, that's really good. Right, let's so next up we were going to look at, in terms of bring to life a first-hand experience from an AfID volunteer. So bring to life a lot of the points that David's just mentioned. So really pleased and very grateful for joining. We have Lise with us. I don't know, David, if you want to say a few words first, or we hand straight over to Lise. I'm kind of
just very briefly. Yeah, as I say, very grateful, Lise, to get off the plane this morning and get home and get on Zoom. No, Lisa has done 2 assignments with us. So last year she did a 3-week placement with Salt Academy in Cambodia, just this morning returned from a second placement, 3 weeks with Indota in Action in Tanzania. With that, hand over to Lise just to share some thoughts.
Yes, thank you. Well, I'm happy to be here. Maybe just to say a bit about myself. I'm from Denmark, but I've lived many years in Brussels. And a colleague of mine told me about the AfID, and I thought that sounds amazing, that you can use your skills in auditing and accounting. I'm a public sector auditor, and I've worked many years in supreme audit institutions and international organizations with auditing. And last year was my first time that I volunteered with the AfID, and I went to Cambodia for 3 weeks. And today I just came back from, as Dave mentioned, from Arusha in Tanzania after 3 weeks there. I can only recommend it. It's a lifetime experience, I would say. I wish I had known about this much many years before. It's really interesting, and there's a big need for help and skills in finance and accounting. It's difficult to actually understand before you try it. Before I went to Cambodia, I was thinking, I wonder what I can do, and if I can help them, or if they're too advanced already. But it's only when you're on site you realize that, at least the ones I've done, it is very, very basic level. It's really basic. Both the assignment in Cambodia and Tanzania, they're to a certain extent similar. It was about really reviewing their financial processes, helping them improve. In Cambodia, they had a team of 3 people in finance. At the time, I thought still they were very basic, but that was before I went to Tanzania, because in Tanzania they have no people in finance. So there was a lot to do there. But everyone you meet, are amazing people and are very dedicated to what they're doing in the NGO they have. The one in Tanzania, they are trying to improve education for children by basically renovating schools in the rural areas, building gardens, toilet facilities, so the children want to go to school and have a chance to pass their exams. And I was quite surprised because they have 2 full-time staff, but the others are actually local people that are volunteering also from Tanzania. Again, they were well educated and smart people, but none of them had any background in finance and accounting. So we were talking about really improving cash management processes. I mean, the cash was lying on a shelf in a cabinet, although it was locked, but I bought them a safe box just to put the money inside. There are no records of, I mean, they had all the receipts, but no records of basically what they spent the money on. So, you know, it's about creating cash book templates, a lot of templates basically, and explaining them how to do things. Even Excel training I did in Tanzania. It's also very basic, but yeah, you really see that it's important because NGOs only exist if they have donors, and obviously nowadays today donors want also to be sure that they know where the money are going and that there's a minimum level of controls in place depending on the donor. So it is very important what people like us can help NGOs with. Both Dave and Alex mentioned a bit the experience itself and the different culture. For sure, it's a different culture no matter where you go. I mean, I can only recommend that you really take on the experience and you forget how you do back home, what you eat back home and so on, but take on the full experience, try whatever they just blend in. I was about to say also follow what they're doing and be open and positive towards how they're doing things, and follow their rhythm also. Be also aware that obviously things, it's another tempo. So just relax and you will be able to do a lot of things in 2-3 weeks. But it's a different tempo than your normal job, obviously, where there are deadlines probably and so on. But you can still do a lot of things. You will be surprised, in fact, how much you can help them with and how much people also give back to you. It's very giving. I found that it's extremely giving to be able to help. But it's also a nice challenge. In Cambodia, for example, we were doing some training in just basic finance and accounting, like what's internal control, segregation of duties. But the people did not understand that well English. And I've never heard about these terminologies that we're used to using every day. So it's a nice challenge also trying to explain what is segregation of duties, finding basic English terms to be able to explain people. And once they understand it, they had lots of examples of things they were not sure was good enough and so on. But that's also a nice challenge to try to explain things that you and your normal colleagues know every day, but suddenly you have to explain it to someone who's never heard about it. And in fact, you realize it's not so easy. If you're not used to it, at least you need to think a bit. I was trying the last weeks in Tanzania to explain debit and credit and opening and ending balances on a bank account. I didn't succeed so well in the beginning, but
Lise, I had to unmute myself then because I was laughing and I just wanted to make sure, like, I can't imagine. I was thinking segregation of duties, yes, but like debits and credits, going back to fundamentals, as particularly with like some of the language piece, incredible.
Yeah, I think I can only recommend it, to be honest. It is really and especially everyone you meet, they will be, well, first of all grateful, but also I find that in an NGO, everyone, the people there are there because they really want to be there and they want to help or do the purpose that the NGO have. So you will meet people that are highly motivated. Whereas, I mean, I guess depending on where we work, sometimes we have all nonsense at our job, but it's a different atmosphere when everyone works for the same purpose and really want to help. So that gives a lot to you also. It's like also a mental travel somehow, actually, and a good break from your normal daily life. So, but
That's
yeah,
amazing. Thank you. Like, David, you need to like bottle Lise, and you can just use her as like the best possible advocate for what you do at AfID, because it's hard to think that you could listen to that and not feel inspired to give it a try and give overseas volunteering a go. That's just incredible.
Absolutely. No, she's fantastic. Not just for saying those positive things about it, but no, at least I mean, all of our volunteers, to be fair, it's get similar feedback from the partners. Just very grateful that they've had the benefit of this expertise. And I mean, from what Lise just said, yeah, I mean, that's at a very basic level. They do range, to be honest. So we do have some partners that are slightly more developed. So it's not always quite as back to square one as that, but often it is. And Lisa, I mean, she's a senior finance professional with vast experience with huge organisations, and she's just been able to adapt to the circumstances of those local organisations in a way that perhaps you felt you might not be able to. Lise, I don't know. Were you surprised at how easy it was to go back to the very basic principles?
I mean, as I mentioned, in Cambodia, I didn't know what to expect. This was the first time. But then you adjust and you realize how it is. So in Tanzania, now I didn't prepare before, and I knew what to expect, and I could use a lot. But yeah, it is true that you really have to go back to what you learned in school and maybe never applied, because I mean, how often do you deal with actual cash and cash management nowadays? I mean,
yes.
And no bank. So I mean, but I mean, first of all, AfID provides a lot of material actually also, and nowadays you can find everything online also. So if there's anything you're in doubt of, you can find it online, which the NGO doesn't take the time to do. But I mean, I also chose this assignment specifically because I do audit every day, so I didn't want it to do audit again, and I didn't want it to come in and check them and have to report back to someone else.
Yeah.
So it was bit on purpose. I chose these assignments where I really feel that it's basic, but in fact, when it's at that basic level, it could almost be life and death for the NGO,
yes.
to be honest. Because if they don't have basic things in place, who knows if the donor pulls out there, that's it. So I kind of like that to help them really at that level, because it's so needed. The one in Tanzania, that there's a long way to go, but so that will be a continuing. But yeah, and in Cambodia, as I said, they had finance people, but they were changing positions. One were leaving, so they also. And then even if they have finance people, I mean, again, you'll just be surprised about the level.
Yeah.
So there's I mean, no matter what, you can help them. Even if you are a newly educated accountant or auditor, there's always going to be something that you can help with.
And we say that a lot actually for individuals, you know, looking to volunteer their financial skills. That often, say a smaller charity or a school, they might have one person in the organization who has, you know, if they're fortunate, they'll have at least one person with financial skills. Often that individual can feel, an employee, that individual can feel quite isolated at times and sort of lonely in their role. And even to have someone like yourself, Lise, where they can bounce ideas off, get someone to check the work that they've done and give them a second opinion or think about another way to do it. Even that has huge value in terms of.
No, exactly. And then also, I mean, you have to also just let go a bit about all your things you're used to at work, where everything is in a certain way, because forget about, I mean, you can do the basic, but forget about having proper internal controls and segregation duties. It's impossible in some of these places. But you can at least have something very basic with two people approving a bank transaction. But you have to really lower your I mean, it's just many things are different. But it's a good experience also, just learning and talking to the people. I mean, one example just now, I was both in Cambodia and Tanzania, because a lot was also in English. Even in Cambodia, I like to read the laws and regulations also to see what does an NGO have to follow, because nowadays everywhere the government implements IPSAS and many different things, requirements for an NGO.
That is brilliant. Thank you so much, Lise, for sharing your story, and thank you so much for coming when probably right now you're still in a completely wild or different time zone. So thank you so much for.
Well, the good thing is there's only 1 hour time difference.
Oh, there you go, because you're going straight south. Yes, of course. Yes,
Yeah.
that's actually good thinking. You're right compared
But
to
thank you.
Yeah,
Thank you, Lise.
Thank you so much. Right, I'll just in terms of to close out, we've got 2 parts then to finish with. One is I'll hand back to David just to talk through the next steps. Hopefully you feel inspired from what you've heard from Lisa. The next steps if you want to volunteer with AfID, and then we've got a chance for some final Q&As. So I'm hand back to you, David.
Thank you. Yeah, just run through this quickly. So a couple of first steps. So have a good look through the AfID website. I would recommend that. afid.org.uk, and 2 sections on there in particular. There's the volunteer FAQ, which gives a wealth of information about what's involved and how it all works. And then there's a section with past volunteer case studies, interviews and blogs, which again just gives a much better insight into the reality of what it looks like, much more so than what I can explain. And then if you were interested in volunteering either remotely or interested in a trustee or treasurer role, we have a live listing of those roles on the website. So it's simply a case of expressing your interest in any that particularly appeal. And then with volunteering overseas, so that's the process there works slightly differently because there's more moving parts to it, I guess. So the first step with that is to just get in touch with us, and we can talk through your plans, whether they're definite plans or just something that you might be keen on for the future. We're happy to talk you through that. So and just briefly on that, the way the overseas volunteering works is that we find out your availability, when you want to go, how long you want to go for, any preferences that you might have for particular locations or particular types of organizations, and then we'd usually come up with 2 or 3 different options for you to consider. So the email address info@afid.org.uk, and our number is 0208 123 7552.
Brilliant. And David, and for those who've joined us live and who'll seen this recording back, will be all of these contact details. We'll be sharing the slides around for those who attended, but then the slides will also be available on our Charter Path website, so charterpath.org.uk, under the events section, and we'll have these hosted up there as well. And we'll also have a link through to the recording so people can access that. Brilliant. I mean, I just feel like we've covered so much in the time that we've had, and generally now in my mind I'm thinking about when can I get away for a window to do this. So just absolutely brilliant in terms of understanding more about the potential to volunteer overseas and the fact that it's accessible. We've got a chance for a few minutes of Q&A. So happy for those who join, if they've got any questions that they'd like to ask David or Lise or myself, feel free to unmute yourself and you can ask questions, or you can post into the chat. I've also got a couple of other questions that were posted in if there aren't any questions from those who are joining us live. But if there is anyone who'd like to ask a question who's joined us live, please feel free to unmute and ask away. I think we've got someone who's raised their hands. Maybe Dinio, is that right?
Yes, it's Danelle. Hi. I've actually joined from South Africa. So I just wanted to find out. So Liz made mention of the fact that AfID provides resources to aid in your volunteer assignment. Can you maybe just maybe further unpack what exactly it is? What sort of support do they provide to sort of aid you in better completing whatever assignment you'd be on when you're volunteering?
Yeah, absolutely. So in the run up to the assignment, we provide quite a lot of sort of written resources. Obviously, we don't send vast amounts of volunteers each year. It's quite a relatively niche thing that we do in terms of just placing accountants and volunteers. So we have a lot of conversations with the volunteer directly and can talk through the scope of work with them and things like that. But the resources, there's a couple of manuals that we make available. we send through a case study of a typical AfID partner and some of the challenges there, and some materials to work through on that. If you're following on from a previous volunteer, we would put you in touch with that person, and you would have access to their reports, so you can talk things through with them. Yeah, plenty, I think, but there's always more available, and we are, as I said earlier, it's not a case of matching you up to an organisation and then we sort of abandon you and you're on your own. So typically we would call into you, give you a call sort of the day after you have arrived, and that's really more to check in that accommodation was okay and the journey was okay, and so on. But then we would have a weekly catch-up call with you. Say weekly, that's what's scheduled, but you can reach out to us at any time if there's anything that you want to talk through, and either we can support you with that, or we may well have a past volunteer like Lise that has come across something very similar previously that we would put you in touch with.
Brilliant.
So you're not on your own at all.
And David, linked to that.
Thanks.
Yeah, linked to that question, David. Great question. Thank you, Danilo. How does the health check tool work as a sort of a methodology to apply that, you know, you touched on in that list of kind of approaches or tasks?
Yeah, so that's just a good starting point often with organisations. So sometimes an organisation will approach us, or a donor will flag an organisation to us, and they have a very clear idea as to what's wrong and what they need support with and what they need to improve. But other times, and I suspect this was the case with the two organisations Lise supported, they would come to us knowing that their financial management is not as it should be, and perhaps a donor has queried something, or they just know they're not doing what they should. So we would arrange an initial assignment, could just be 2 weeks, and it would just be a sort of general assessment of everything that they're doing, and then that volunteer would start working through some of those, but that would really inform us of what a follow-up assignment might be focused on.
Brilliant. That's nice, isn't it? Because you get that sort of that you can have that sort of progressive relationship as an organisation for AfID with a non-profit or NGO to help support them through multiple volunteers potentially over time to make progress.
Exactly that. And even that financial health check, I mean, most organisations would benefit from something like that, just a fresh outside pair of eyes to come and look at what they're doing. And even if they report back that actually 9 things out of 10 are exactly as they should be, and they're doing well, but there's always things that can be improved or strengthened. So it's a worthwhile thing for any organisation.
Brilliant. We've had a hand raised by Shalini. Do you want to unmute yourself, Shalini, and ask your question?
Yes. Hi, everyone. I'm joining from the Caribbean, Trinidad and Tobago.
Amazing.
So I just have a quick question. Because I am based from the Caribbean in Trinidad, and AfID is a UK-based organization, if I do want to volunteer, would there be any problems or limitations? I mean, I know like you all have remote volunteer, but in terms of just the administrative process of volunteering with AfID, would there be any limitations or problems?
No problems with that. So I don't know what the latest count is, but we've probably had, I mean, we've sent volunteers to 60 countries. We've probably had volunteers from a similar number of countries. I think probably about 60% of our volunteers are from the UK, and the others are based overseas. And to be honest, it's quite rare for us to actually meet the volunteers in person. It is all over Zoom and phone calls and so on. So yeah, no issues with that.
Amazing.
Okay, thanks.
This is so cool. Like the diversity of the attendees on this webinar is absolutely amazing, isn't it? I absolutely love it. This is what's so exciting about this type of opportunity, but also, like you say, the way of working, in the sense that as a virtual organisation, you can partner with volunteers from all around the world, but help them be directed them to other locations all around the world too. I think it's
it just shows
incredible.
the skill set as well. So yeah, an accountant from Trinidad and Tobago is can help every bit as much as an accountant from the UK, Australia, or anywhere. It's a universal sort of skill.
Yes.
But there's just pockets in various countries where they don't have access to that skill set.
Yeah, amazing. I'm just checking to see any other questions. I can't see any other raised hands. We're pretty much with a couple of minutes over time. Any other questions that people would like to raise? I mean, as we said before on the screen here, we've got contact details for CharterPath. So if you've got any kind of follow-up questions, please get in touch with CharterPath at info@charterpath.org.uk. And just to go back to your slide, David, you've got the contact details here to AfID too, so info@afid.org.uk. So yeah, from our side, we hope that you've enjoyed the session. And please do get in touch if you've got questions and you feel inspired to volunteer your skills overseas. I just want to say a huge thank you to David from AfID for all the wisdom that you shared with us, and obviously also to Lise as well for sharing her first-hand experiences, which are so live from having just returned from Tanzania. So thank you so much for both of you for joining. I really appreciate it.
Thank you, Alex, for the opportunity. Really good.
And we'll just finish by thanking all of you who've been able to join live and for all your great